All right, last time we left off, we were talking about the core concepts of expectancy violation theory and talking about what creates certain expectations, right? Remembering that we have certain expectations we're expecting to be met in regards to how it is that we deal with our personal space based on the context of the situation, your relationship with the person, and those communicator or demographic characteristics of the communicator. So the next question that expectancy violation theory tackles is the question of a valence, a violation valence, right? We all have expectations for how it is that people will engage our personal space, right? How they'll treat it. Well, how is our communication affected when there are violations? A violation is anything that is different than what it is that we expected about our treatment of personal space, right? What expectancy violation posits is that we place a valence. A valence is the value, right? A value that we put on a violation. So we can deem violations positive or negative, for example. Right, you can think of a time when you're, like, we think of violation in negative terms, right? But you can think of positive violations, right? What if someone that you really like, you're romantically attracted to, you don't even think that they know you exist, and they could walk up to you and give you a kiss. And that would be a violation. Now, that you would put a fairly high, a positive high valence on that, even though that was a violation of your proxemics. Similarly, it's not only people invading your intimate zone when we talk about expectations. So there are places where we might expect our intimate zone to be invaded, for example. So when you go to the doctor's office is a good example. You have a very different set of expectations because of that particular kind of context. So when your doctor does things that invade your intimate zone in a way that if other people were to do it, it would not be a violation. Now, what if your doctor were to stay on the other side of the room and not want to get close to you, right? Well, that would also be a violation of your personal space, and it would be a violation of your expectations. And that would be something that you would put a relatively low valence on, right? Because you'd be freaked out a little bit if your doctor didn't have any interest in touching you and checking you out. And so this links well to symbolic interactionism, right? I mean, if we put meanings on any kind of violation, any kind of activity that we have with other people, we tend to label, right? It has a socially recognized meaning. And we sort out trying to determine whether or not our meaning is something we put a positive or a negative valence on. So we just kind of talked about that here. Situations where you have a positive, negative valence based on that, right? Also, we were saying it's positive. It could also be negative too, right? Someone could get up in your face and we could have the close talker situation. And that would be something that you would probably see as a fairly negative valence. Now, that is very different than what we're going to call a communicator reward valence. A violation valence is you evaluating the violation itself. But that's not the only thing that expectancy violation theory takes into account. We also have to take into account who is doing the violation. So there's a sum of positive and negative attributes that a person brings to an encounter. And we also have to take into account the potential that he or she has to reward or punish you in the future. So if it's someone in a position of power, for example, who violates your personal space, you're going to be way less likely. That person will have a high communicator reward valence because you might not want to say something because while it might make you a little bit uncomfortable, right, you don't want to imagine it's your boss, right? You might not want to lose your job, or you might have fear that you won't get a promotion. Expectancy violation theorists often point to communicator reward valence as a reason that individuals sometimes let sexual harassment go, right? So you think through the potential rewards punishments in a communication context. You're thinking about, what does this person have to offer me? Now, if someone who you didn't care about, someone you never would see again, came up and started invading your intimate zone, you'd be more likely to say, hey, get away from me, right? Because that person is going to have a very low communicator reward valence. Now, what we do is, expectancy violation theory posits that we weigh the violation valence versus the communicator reward valence. So maybe the violation valence is just slightly negative, right? But the person has a high communicator reward valence. Well, in that situation, we would probably let it go. But if For example, the violation valence could get so egregious that you feel like you have to say something, and maybe the violation valence would surpass the communicator reward valence there. And right, so you might end up taking some kind of action, and you would give that encounter overall a negative violation valence. Right, confusing violation is what makes us search the context to figure it out. That's what we were saying in regards to kind of giving things a symbolic meaning. And so, right, and that's one of the things that we take into account when we're sorting out, is this a positive valence or is this a negative valence? I was going to suggest that for your journal entries for this, that you think about an example of a time where you had to deal with communicator reward valence. Maybe a time where you had to weigh a violation valence versus a communicator reward valence. So, right, we're here at the end of our theory, and let's run it through a critique. First of all, this is an objective theory because we're interested in cause and effect, right? We're interested in how does personal space, right, what effects does that have on our communication? Does it give us a good explanation of the data? I think intuitively we tend to say yes, but they get mixed results with this when they run it in experiments. Right, we get kind of soft determinism. Things tend to happen, but it's not every time. And once again, that comes down to kind of the cultural context that personal space comes out of. Prediction of future events, it should fall fairly high on that. Next time your expectations are violated, you will weigh a violation valence versus a communicator reward valence, and that's how you're going to come up with understanding the social interaction that you have there. Relative simplicity, I think it's very high on relative simplicity, easy to understand. It has a clear hypothesis that can be tested. Cause and effect is at the center of this theory. And finally, does it have practical utility? I think it does. I think it can help us understand our personal space and the way that we interact with each other in different kind of ways. And it can help us be aware of how it is that we're evaluating a valence when we encounter one. So, all right, well, put it through your own critique. Tell me if you think it's a good theory, and I'll see you all next time.